Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. A weekly feature on 93.5 FM and live streaming at lakefm.com. Here's the president of the Lake George Battlefield Alliance, John Denuzzo.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is John Denuzzo, Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, welcoming Bruce Venter, a trustee of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, author of The Battle of Hubbardton, and CEO of America's History, LLC. Happy New Year, Bruce.
Hey, John. Happy New Year to you, too.
We talked last week about some of the key historic sites within the Lake George-Lake Champlain region that should be on everyone's bucket list or New Year's resolution to go visit in 2025. How about sites outside the Lake George-Lake Champlain region? What are some that you'd recommend that people absolutely should go to if they're interested in American history?
I think you have to go to Boston. No question about it, because that's where the revolution is going to start. Just outside of Boston on Lexington Green and Concord Bridge. Both of these sites are administered through the National Park Service. It's just the place you want to be, because it's right in the center of Lexington, Massachusetts. The green is there. One of the buildings that was there at the time is no longer there, but you could get an idea of what the Patriots were up against when 800 British redcoats showed up on the green in the early morning hours of April 19th. Then you can move on to Concord Bridge, the shot heard around the world. They've reconstructed the bridge there. There's a number of historic sites you can see in the Concord area. And then you can, when you follow the British retreat, after they were stopped at the Concord Bridge, you can go on Battle Road, which marks all of the significant parts of the retreat, like Merriman's Crossroads, the Bloody Angle, and Parker's Revenge. And all this is part of the Battlefield Road that people will want to see. And then, of course, as the British got into back to Boston, they were surrounded by the American militia and Minutemen that were aroused in April. Then we had in June of 1775, the Battle of Bunker Hill. Now, I have to warn everybody, that's it's in Charlestown, which is a center part of Boston, and so it's all built up. And there's very little of the battlefield that's left. You can get on top of Bunker Hill, where there's an obelisk that was put up, I think, in 1825. But it's difficult to understand the Battle of Bunker Hill because of all the housing that has encroached upon the battlefield itself. But that should not be a reason not to go. You should go anyway, because it's one of the significant battles in the early days of the American Revolution. While you're in Boston, I would highly recommend Paul Revere's house. It still stands. It's run by the Paul Revere Society, and they have excellent history guides to take you through the house. At the same time, when you're at that house, then you can walk over to the Old North Church, where we have the famous one if by land, two if by sea, lanterns in the belfry. They give a wonderful tour there. You can walk from there over to Copp's Hill, which is a graveyard, but that's where General Burgoyne, our friend from Saratoga, observed the fighting at Bunker Hill. He observed it from afar because Bunker Hill is in Charlestown, which is across the river there. So he wasn't in any danger, but he did see what was happening to the British Army as it got mowed down by the Patriots. Then there's, of course, Dorchester Heights, which is where General Washington ended up putting the cannon from Fort Ticonderoga, which were hauled down from Fort Ticonderoga to Albany, across the Hudson, and then through Massachusetts by Henry Knox. And they put them up there on Dorchester Heights, and the British decided to skedaddle. And they evacuated Boston on March 17th, which we know as St. Patrick's Day, but over in Boston they call it Evacuation Day. And I believe it's a state holiday. So if you want to immerse yourself into the early days of the Revolution and celebrate the 250th anniversary of the start of the war, then I would highly recommend going to Boston.
Great. Okay, Bruce, how about taking us out of Boston? What are some other spots that you'd highly recommend?
Yeah, I'd like to follow the American Army into Canada in 1775 next year, because that's an anniversary date, with General Schuyler in command And then, of course, he got sick, and then we had General Montgomery take over. But to go north on Lake Champlain to Illinois, and then to St. John, which was captured by Montgomery, and then to Champlain, which was captured by the Americans, and then to Montreal, which was captured by the Americans. The campaign was doing marvelous up to that point, and then follow the route down to Quebec, where General Montgomery met up with Colonel Benedict Arnold, who had come up through Maine, and they met up at Quebec. General Carleton was in command, and Montgomery ordered an attack on the last day of the year of 1775, and unfortunately, he was an up-and-coming star in the Continental Army, but he was killed in that battle. Benedict Arnold was wounded.
It sounds like a great trip. Where should one start in terms of doing that? How does one get his arms around making that trip? Is there any existing organization of sites that you could follow or anything?
Well, I think you'd have to read the book, The 14th Colony.
And that book is by
I'm
Anderson. Is it Mark Anderson?
Yes, Mark Anderson.
Okay, so
Mark Anderson wrote a wonderful book. Before that, there were some older books. There's actually a 2-volume study of the Canadian campaign that was done in the early 20th century. But Mark has the most up-to-date information. And I think if you followed his book, you could pretty much map out how to follow the significant sites of that campaign right up through to Quebec and then the retreat from Quebec.
Okay, good. Thank you. Other sites that you highly recommend to us?
Oh, how about, now this is not an anniversary site, but a lot has been done lately at Brandywine Battlefield in Pennsylvania. This was fought at the same time or just prior to the Saratoga campaign in terms of chronology, and George Washington faced off against General Howe, and Washington was defeated at Brandywine. But the significance of it is that it had not been preserved hardly at all, maybe 10 years ago. But then the American Battlefield Trust started buying up land, little parts of land, and so that you can really interpret the battle pretty well if you have a tour guide like Mike Harris, who wrote a book on the Battle of Brandywine, and Gary Eckelbarger, who also wrote a book on the Battle of Brandywine. These two fellows are excellent in terms of leading tours. I might even do a tour myself next year with Gary, but I think that might be something people would like to see, because 5-10 years ago, you couldn't see it because it was all private land. But now with the different acreage that the Battlefield Trust has bought, you get a pretty good interpretation of what happened there.
You know, one site that you and I have spoken of, because I just gone there for the first time this past March, coming back from the American Revolution Conference in Richmond, is Washington Crossing, Pennsylvania. What do you think of that site in terms of its layout and the ability to kind of realize just what happened there and how it's been preserved?
Yeah, it's I've done a couple of tours there on Trenton and Princeton, and the Washington Crossing. I think they have a new visitor center now.
Yeah.
And one thing that people should know about is that in December, on Christmas Day, they stage a reenactment of the crossing of the Delaware, and it's very well done. But if you don't want to go ruin your Christmas just for a reenactment, you can go 2 weeks before that, and they do a dress rehearsal. And it's the same thing. They bring out the Durham boats. They have George Washington in uniform, Henry Knox in uniform. They've got General Glover and his Marblehead men that rowed the boats across. I've gone to it with some friends of mine, and it's a really great experience. So I would highly recommend the Washington Crossing. You get the exact dates if you go on the website. But anyway, for next year, I'd highly recommend it because the anniversary of 250th will be next year.
Now, that is something to put on our to-do list to go see that. I really like the whole layout of the Pennsylvania side. And the New Jersey side isn't bad either. I mean, you can cross a very convenient bridge. You don't have to go by boat any longer from Washington Crossing Visitor Center, from the Pennsylvania side across the Delaware into Jersey. And you go north a little bit to Princeton, south a little bit to Trenton, and there's some well-preserved places there, more so in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, they've done a nice job on the Princeton battlefield. Likewise, the Battlefield Trust has preserved some really good land there on the battlefield. They're putting a new visitor center in at Princeton. And as I recall, you can follow the routes once you cross the Delaware into Trenton and, get up on that hill where Henry Knox put his cannon to fire down the streets of Trenton. Yeah, it's all built up. I mean, it's a city, but you can get a pretty good idea of what happened.
Okay, that's great, Bruce. Thank you so much for the recommendations. We'll add them to our list, our New Year's resolutions for 2025. Happy New Year again to you and your family, and to all our listeners out there, thank you very much. Our Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance website is lakegeorgebattlefield.org. Stay in touch. Thank you, Bruce.
Thanks, John.
Lake George Battlefield Moments, a production of the Lake George Battlefield Park Alliance, preserving our area's incredible history. For more on this topic, check out the Lake George Battlefield Alliance podcast, a weekly feature on Lake FM 93.5 FM and live streaming at lakefm.com. For more information, go to lakegeorgebattlefield.org and tune in every Saturday morning for Lake George Battlefield Moments.